judge acted as a 13th juror,
Yes,
one
he
that we
did.
did not choose. And I think the judge said coercion today as a basis for a sentence at least a dozen times. We think that that is unconstitutional. I mean, the jury's verdict was resoundingly clear. There was no sex trafficking. There was no racketeering. Everything was consensual. Everything was adult. Very bad day. There is a human being now in custody for 50 months.
Diddy was just sharing.
Based upon
What happens when one of the most powerful men in music finally faces the one person he can't control, a federal judge? Sean Diddy Combs thought his long, messy legal saga had finally come to an end, but after the verdict, it exploded again. Because right after hearing his 50-month prison sentence, Diddy's own lawyer turned the courtroom upside down, accusing the judge of acting like a 13th juror. And now, that single line has become the spark behind a massive appeal, one that could rewrite everything. But to understand how we got here, and why this moment shocked even those inside Diddy's inner circle, we need to go back to the day the verdict dropped. 1. The verdict that changed everything. When the jury came back, the entire courtroom froze. Diddy, one of hip-hop's biggest moguls, was found guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. But the jury cleared him of the far more serious charges, racketeering and sex trafficking. It was a split decision, one that seemed like a small victory. Because if convicted of racketeering, Diddy could have faced decades behind bars. For a moment, it looked like the Bad Boy founder might escape with a relatively short sentence. But when the judge began to speak, that illusion shattered. He sentenced Diddy to 50 months in federal prison, just over 4 years, calling the crimes coercive and predatory. And in that instant, everything changed. Minutes later, Diddy's lawyer, Marc Agnifilo, stepped outside the courthouse and let it rip. He told reporters the judge had overstepped, saying, "The judge acted as a 13th juror, one we did not choose." He second-guessed the jury's verdict. It was a rare move. Attorneys almost never go after a federal judge in public, but Agnifilo's frustration was boiling over, because his team had begged for no more than 14 months, arguing that everything involved was consensual and between adults. But Judge Arun Subramanian didn't buy it. He used what's known as acquitted conduct, behavior Diddy wasn't convicted of, to justify the longer sentence. That's controversial even in legal circles, and it set off a firestorm online. Fans flooded social media saying, if he wasn't convicted of trafficking, how can the judge punish him for it? Others argued the opposite, that the sentence was still too light given the disturbing testimony heard in court. Either way, the courtroom drama wasn't over, because Agnifilo's next move would change everything. What made this attack even more shocking was that, just weeks earlier, Agnifilo had praised the exact same judge. During interviews after the trial, he called Subramanian a fair, thoughtful, hardworking judge. He even said, "No trial is perfect, but this one came pretty close." So what happened between then and now? Insiders say it all comes down to one word: coercion. Judge Subramanian reportedly cited elements of coercion in Diddy's actions as part of why he went beyond the minimum. To the defense, that sounded like the judge was quietly retrying the trafficking case even though the jury had cleared him. And that's when the tone flipped. Agnifilo, who once called the judge terrific, now said he'd acted like a second jury. The shift was so dramatic that even reporters following the case were stunned. But here's where it gets deeper. Within days, Diddy's legal team filed an official notice of appeal. They're challenging not only the sentence, but also the application of the Mann Act, a century-old law originally designed to target pimps in human trafficking. The defense argues that the law was misapplied, that Diddy's conduct didn't meet the legal threshold, and that using acquitted behavior to extend his sentence violates due process. If that argument gains traction, it could open the door for new legal precedent, not just for Diddy, but for anyone convicted under similar conditions. Legal analysts say this might become one of the biggest celebrity appeal cases in years, possibly reshaping how acquitted conduct is treated in federal court. And if the appeal succeeds, Diddy could see his sentence reduced or even overturned entirely. But while the lawyers battle it out in the courts, Diddy himself has already faced a different kind of judgment from the public. During sentencing, Diddy reportedly stood before the court and said he was humbled and broken to my core. He claimed he'd been living in reflection for months and was ready to accept accountability. But his words didn't move everyone. Outside the courthouse, crowds were split, half shouting support, the other half calling for justice. Social media erupted again, with some fans saying the system was out to destroy a black mogul, while others insisted that power and money don't erase the truth. Meanwhile, several of Diddy's former associates and ex-partners posted cryptic messages online, fueling even more speculation. Some hinted that karma had finally come around. Others suggested that this was only the beginning, not the end, of Diddy's reckoning. And that's what makes this story so volatile, because in Hollywood, reputation isn't just about truth, it's about narrative. So why did Judge Subramanian go so hard? According to court filings, he cited a pattern of coercive behavior and abuse of power, even referencing allegations that were not part of the conviction. He argued that sentencing guidelines allowed him to consider the totality of conduct, not just the specific charges. To many legal experts, that's a red flag. One analyst told Rolling Stone that the ruling walks a dangerous line between justice and overreach. In other words, it blurs the line between what a jury decides and what a judge believes. That's the core of Diddy's appeal. Was he punished for crimes he was never convicted of? It's a question that could ripple far beyond this one case, touching how American courts balance power between judge and jury. But the stakes go beyond law, because behind every headline, there's still the image of one of hip-hop's most powerful figures watching his empire crumble. For decades, Diddy represented success, the man who built Bad Boy Records, launched global brands, and lived a life most could only dream of. But now, that empire sits in limbo. Brands have distanced themselves, partnerships have dissolved, and his once glamorous image has been replaced with mugshots and courtroom sketches. The irony? Even as he sits behind bars, Diddy remains a headline magnet. Every move, every statement from his lawyers becomes viral, not because people care about legal nuance, but because it's Diddy. The man who once said, "Can't stop, won't stop," is now fighting for the one thing fame can't protect: freedom. So what happens now? The appeal process could take months, even years. If the appellate court agrees with Agnifilo's arguments, Diddy's sentence could be cut dramatically. If not, he'll serve the remainder of his term, with roughly 3 years still left to go, counting time served. But there's something bigger brewing here. Because this case has opened a public debate on judicial power, celebrity justice, and whether fame shields or destroys. And Diddy's story, from mansion parties to federal prison, is a cautionary tale about how quickly power can collapse when accountability arrives. The big reflection. So maybe the Real story isn't about one man versus a judge. It's about what happens when the image of untouchable power finally meets the limits of the law. And whether you think the sentence was fair or not, one thing is certain: Diddy's fight isn't over. Because as his lawyer said that day outside the courthouse,
Rapper
this
Sean
isn't
Diddy
justice.
Combs has filed a notice of
This
appeal
is
against
just
his
the beginning.
conviction and prison sentence.
Now the world waits to see if the appeal
charges.
will rewrite
He
history
finds triple Grammy Award winner
confirm
is
that
serving
even
a
legends
50-month
aren't
prison
above the verdict.
sentence, arguing